Okay, but did you stop and say, hey, it's me?
No, it's so funny because I hadn't seen them in years. Like, they didn't recognize me. They were like, "You are glowing. What's your secret?" And I said, "Honey, I'm healing."
Hey guys.
Hey.
So something we are going to be doing on our podcast is having like a little mini book club.
Yeah, because, honey, we're healing, and sometimes that looks like reading horror fiction. Is this technically horror?
Did you say horror? I don't think it's
Yeah.
horror. I think the adaptations of it have been classified as like horror.
Fair. Very fair. So when I was reading this, we have different editions or different published copies, but does yours have a letter from Mary Shelley in the beginning?
Listen, this thing had so many letters.
No, it says the author's introduction.
Oh. I don't know.
Oh, okay.
Let's see. It had like 4 introductions.
Of course it did. So I went heavily into my 4 during this. I underlined like so many things, and I have all of my tabs.
I love that. I did not.
I
Look
am
how
an
beat
office
up it
supply
is.
nerd, all right? So, do you know who Lord Byron is?
No.
So, they were neighbors,
Mhm.
essentially, and they decided to both write a ghost story, and that's where Frankenstein was born.
She literally wrote it off a dare.
Yeah.
So
maybe we
pretty
should
impressive.
do that. I dare you to write a ghost story, Irina.
Okay, I already know you're going to win.
No.
But this weekend, I went to Savannah, one of the most haunted, named the most haunted city in the US, and we did a ghost tour. I've been reading ghost stories like every night, and like our lights have been blowing out, and I'm already.
That's one thing I do not mess with, all right? I do not. I can watch any kind of scary movie. I cannot watch paranormal movies. Like, no.
It wasn't paranormal, and Haven went too, and Lucky slept through the whole thing. Yeah, another day, another story for another day. But what were you saying about ghosts?
This started out of a ghost story.
Oh, yes. Dare. A dare, yeah. Yeah, no, you would win. You would win.
No,
like,
I don't know.
Not win for creativity and lyrical poetry, and mine would actually be absolutely terrifying and so grotesque.
You are a beautiful writer. Anyway, so
yeah, what'd you think?
I actually really enjoyed it. Disclaimer, I did not finish it, and not because I didn't want to, but I just merely ran out of time. And that's okay. But I really enjoyed it. I didn't realize that Frankenstein was a ghost, pretty much. Or kind of, what are your thoughts on Frankenstein? Or first of all, what are your thoughts of the book? And then we'll kind of dive into.
I didn't love it. And I wasn't like, no. And how I rate that is like, am I dying to keep going? And like, I can't wait to find out what happens. There were like only certain parts in the book where I was like, oh, this is pretty interesting. But no, I kind of felt like I had to get through it. But and that's as far as the plot. But what I did love was her writing. I loved how lyrical it was. Her writing is beautiful. And what I would love to know more is like in the context of when it was written, because it would probably have a completely different meaning from my interpretation of it now.
Yeah. That's interesting. I found that this was actually pretty easy for me to read. I think that this was a lot easier for me to read than Jane Austen.
And I didn't find it too bad.
I think because it reads more like poetry. But
takes like a chapter or 2.
Yeah, you kind of have to like prime yourself to get into it. But I get what you mean because it's really dense.
Yeah.
And I think when we chose it, we're like, oh, that's only 100 and something pages. That's fine.
No.
It's
But you
literally
have to stop.
yeah, it's literally like a mountain each chapter of like
Yes.
you got to really work at it. But
You have to understand what each little paragraph and sentence meant.
I really enjoyed it. I thought that a lot of the narration on it was very melodramatic and like,
Mhm.
oh, and
I
like,
mean, is he really likable? And I'm talking about Victor. He's not likable. I didn't like him.
no, but I think that that's why I think that that's why Frankenstein with the family, I think that that's what that whole appeal of it was, is to create the juxtaposition of
Mhm.
somebody with a family that's seen a lot of grief and handled it like, woe is me, versus the, was it DeLacy family? What's their name?
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
DeLacy family, where they, like, went through really horrible things too, and they handled it with so much love, and I thought that was really interesting how she talked a lot about or she brought Frankenstein kind of or the monster kind of into this space of seeming almost human, and I thought that that was
mhm.
very relatable.
I
But
liked him.
yeah, I
I
liked
couldn't
him.
stand Victor, but I liked the monster.
I couldn't stand Victor either, but to be honest, I there were parts where I really resonated a lot with him.
Mhm, same,
Um,
especially when it's so interesting that, like, in the 1800s that people will go on a hike to clear their mind. That's, like, what I do. That's where I escape to go clear my mind too.
yeah,
So I liked that turning point, and I really, really thought, like, "Okay, this is a turning point to his depression. This is things are going to change." And they almost did, but he was victim to his own victim mentality again and again and again and again.
yeah. I think the thing that I noticed as I was reading this in the beginning was the monster always manifested when Victor was focusing on unresolved grief.
Mm,
And I pointed at that a lot throughout here. This is interesting.
mhm.
Consider the character of Justine. While her story only takes 2 chapters of Shelley's novel, her role as a secondary character is significant. What is Shelley's purpose in telling Justine's story? What truths about her time is Shelley revealing?
I think it's one thing to I think it was one thing for Victor to grieve the death of someone he loved, someone who was victim to his own creation. But then it's another thing for someone to take the fall for something he should have.
Mhm.
And that is like a theme in the book till the very end. He is constantly living with this guilt of like, oh, it's my fault. Someone died, and then someone has taken on the guilt.
Interesting, and just kind of how everyone knew that she was innocent, but they didn't have a different explanation for it, and so they just let her die.
And he's the only one that knew.
And he's the only one that knew. And he even said, he's like, I can't tell anybody this because I would be perceived as this incredibly like mad person, which he is. So
He could have changed it all for her.
he could have justice for Justine. I mean, that
That
was
the most that and then the ending was like the saddest part.
yeah, yeah.
I find it very interesting how like from the beginning of the book he sounds like someone who just wants to learn. He sounds happy, like everything is good. And then there was just like this sudden turn. Like that's my critique with actually the writing and the plot is that he changed his character so quickly. Well, it happened
Mhm.
over the span of 2 years, but like we only saw she I find that to be one of the most important parts in the book and the creation of Frankenstein himself, but she only spent, like, pages on it. Paragraphs, I should say. That's what I wanted to know more about, was, like, how his mind had warped into this really sadistic and, like, what would you explain? His mentality. What did he go through, to, like, have created something that he should have loved, to then for it to be for him to then hate what he created and then turn on himself too,
I
because
don't
he did.
I don't think that he created out of love. I think that he created out of passion and curiosity for knowledge. And that's something that when Frankenstein or when the I keep saying calling the monster Frankenstein just because I get the green guy in my head, but the monster talks about how knowledge is what made him really sad when he felt,
Right.
like, and I think that has a really big play too on the pursuit of all of those really disreputable, I guess you could say, uh, scholars that Victor was really interested in the beginning, the ones that were really into like magic and metaphysical
Mhm.
things and were really discredited. And I also thought that it was interesting that Victor noted that if his dad had just responded differently from the beginning, that to his curiosity, that this whole thing could have been avoided, or much of this whole thing could have been avoided. I think that that has a big role in it, and I think that that's why the monster manifests a lot, in the beginning at least, whenever he's really overcome with grief, when he's thinking about his mom or Elizabeth or how guilty he is for not going to see his family.
Well, you would think that, correct, he didn't do it out of love, but you would think that with something he was so passionate about, his quest for knowledge and creation, that, like, he would love what he worked
Oh,
so
yeah.
hard on. Have you ever made a recipe that, like, you knew it was bad, but because you put so much effort into it, you loved it when
Yeah.
everyone else is, like, giving you their honest truth? I think about that. It's a very basic
No.
analogy, but, like, if only he had treated his creation with love.
Do you think Victor was capable of love?
I don't know. We don't know that much about him to begin with.
Yeah. I don't know if he would be. I think, he always talked about Elizabeth in a very detached way in the beginning. It didn't feel like initially it did kind of he described her as like the most beautiful and all of that, but then it kind of weaned as time went on and as distance got. Did you notice that? How like his
Yeah.
or his point of view about her changed drastically. And I guess that that's what happens with time too, but
Well, and distance and space and,
yeah.
um, him not being in a healthy mindset and living a complete awful life. He just really pissed me off. Like, he was the creator of all of his problems. He never took responsibility, and he had many chances. That poor monster gave him so many chances, and he ran away from them, and I don't blame him. I don't blame the monster for having rage and aggression.
I don't either. I think that
I find it so interesting how, like, my favorite part of the book was hearing the perspective of the monster. In my head, I call him Frankenstein.
yeah, I do too.
So, the perspective of Frankenstein and, like, how he can show empathy and understand the perspective of, like, the people he's watching and what he's learning in the people, and not once do we see Victor have any empathy or, like, understand the perspective of his monster or the people around him.
That's what's kind of interesting to me because I perceived Frankenstein as the monster as the missing parts of Victor.
That's so good. Yeah.
because the monster was capable of love and capable of
Mhm.
viewing joy and feeling joy and compassion. And yeah, I think the monster emulated everything that was missing out of Victor.
That's probably why, you know, somehow you can imagine maybe during that creation, like, that's what was inspired into the monster, all these missing parts of him.
Mhm.
And 2 points on what you said, and that was so good. That's why at the end of the book, you can see why the monster is crying over his death. And then I thought that was really sad.
Yeah.
And then too, I've read somewhere about how, like, this story was written out of, like, the grief and the hardship that Mary Shelley has gone through.
Mhm.
Now, I don't know if that's correct, I haven't done my research, but I can imagine that maybe she did resonate with Victor, but then also Frankenstein is maybe who she really deep down wanted to be too.
Mm.
It
Yeah,
was
just
sad.
yeah. I just found a quote from the beginning from one of the letters. Even broken in spirit as he is, no one can feel more deeply than he does, or no one can feel more deeply than he does the beauties of nature. Such a man has a double existence. He may suffer misery and be overwhelmed by disappointments. Yet when he has retired into himself, he will be like a celestial spirit that has a halo around him, within whose circle no grief or folly ventures. I underline that because I liked how it talked about he retired into himself, that there's this sense of groundedness and inner home in you. And that's where the celestial spirit comes out. That's where
Mhm.
this no grief or folly, no grief or falsehood is there. It's just you. And I think, again, that's probably where the monster was born out of. Just maybe that was
Mhm.
Victor's form of love, was pouring into his creation just from the like his source, whatever that looked like.
Yeah, and then to think too, but the creator couldn't steward that love.
Mm-mm.
So there runs off Frankenstein living his own life, always being pursued by Victor in a form of rage, revenge.
Yeah.
So ironic that Victor creates something he desperately wants, but then only finds himself to try and destroy it.
I want to try to
What would you
find
rate this?
um like out of 5 stars,
Yeah,
I'd probably say 3.5.
yeah, same. Because I wouldn't read it again, and I don't think I would recommend it, but I loved the writing. I wish I could speak like this.
I think I would recommend it, but with the caveat of like you have to know the audience, or you have to,
Mm,
I wouldn't be like, I
they
wouldn't
have to
tell
read
anyone off this.
classics.
No, I mean, someone that enjoys classics,
Yeah,
you know,
would enjoy the writing.
right. And that
Yeah.
there's a lot more like complexity and layers and themes and all of that. And
Mhm.
um, one of the questions talked a lot about the use of ice and
Yeah.
um, how do you see that playing into the story because you finished it? How do you see that as like a
Um,
central grounding block?
I find it interesting that Frankenstein's senses and understanding of himself and the world really started when he was met with fire,
Mm,
and then life was ended because of their because they were stuck in ice. So I see like a fire. I don't even know what that could mean, but like just find it ironic that there is this fire and ice. contrast of like something beginning and something ending.
Yeah.
I'm sure I can go down a rabbit hole and think of the deeper meaning behind it all, but
There's I think it's a Robert Frost poem. They read it in the beginning of Twilight. You
I know
know.
exactly where you're going.
You know. That's what I think about. Is it
Very
Robert
nice.
Frost?
I think so.
Yeah.
Do you feel like we did justice to uh, critiquing and analyzing Frankenstein? No.
No. No.
But that's as much as I feel like we can say without like going deep down rabbit holes of thoughts and
Yeah. I think if we had 3 hours, different story, you know? But to go on a surface level, just like what were your initial thoughts? I think that we did a
yeah.
pretty good job. I think with any book, you can pick it apart.
Yeah.
And, you know, I definitely really enjoyed this book though. I think it was a really good palate cleanser for our next read.
Yeah. Agreed.
Yeah.
All right. Well, on to the next book.
On to the next book. We'll announce that later.
Sounds good.
Okay. All right. Okay, bye.
Bye.